When you were 8 years old, what types of posters did you have on your walls? Some of the kids in my class had Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, Bon Jovi, Boy George. What I had was a map that I had taken out from my parents' National Geographic and taped it up on my wall. It was a map of Africa. And I used to go to sleep every single night imagining and dreaming about the places on that map. I was fascinated with Kenya. For some reason, I was always drawn to that East African sphere, and I looked at those names, Lamu, Kisumu, and I wondered, what would it be like to go there? What would it be like to meet the people there? What would it be like to travel and take a safari and visit those exotic landscapes? Fast forward 20 years. I kept that vision of that 8-year-old little girl with the map of Africa on her wall. And I held on to that because something in my heart said, you need to go. Now, it didn't make any logical sense. I didn't know anybody from Kenya. I didn't even know anyone who had been to Kenya at that time, but yet something within me was calling me toward that place. So 20 years later, I was 28 years old, and I had the opportunity to apply for a fellowship. This fellowship was working in East Africa on HIV and AIDS prevention work. It was the hardest interview I have ever had in my life because they asked me questions like, oh, great, Mindie, what's your experience with PMTCT? I'm like, I don't even know what that is, let alone do I not have any experience in it. So I was pretty uncertain about what the result was going to be. But they said, we'll call you on Wednesday and we'll let you know what we decide. Great. So Wednesday comes, I'm waiting. I'm not doing any work because all I can think about is, am I going to go to Kenya? But the phone is not ringing. It's not ringing. It's not ringing. Finally, around 5 o'clock, end of the day, the phone rings. Mindie Kniss. Hi, Mindie. We've made a decision. We spent a lot of time thinking about it. We'd like to invite you to Kenya. You'll be based in Nairobi. We'll see you in a few months. And my heart just exploded because this was a dream of mine that I'd had for as long as I can remember. So I went. Was based in Nairobi, was living there for many months working on HIV and AIDS prevention initiatives. And what that led me to was a very unique situation that sometimes I think many of you might be in. When we get the opportunity to step outside of our normal routines, our day-to-day lives, sometimes it's through getting laid off or having a child or something that causes your life to change, you start to see your life with a little bit different perspective. So for me, what that turned into was saying, do I really want to work in corporate America forever? I don't know. My initial plan was to go for a few years, maybe, get some money. You know, I had the house, I had the car, the salary, and great. My heart was not in it, though. So what I decided to do instead, just like that little 8-year-old girl that I was to continue to follow my heart. So my plan was to figure out how to start a business. I had nothing to do with this. I didn't know what I was doing. But I said, I will give myself 1 year from when I get back to the United States to do two things, because I had two really strong passions that were in my heart. One of them was to open a coaching practice. Now, I had never owned a business. Thankfully, I had worked in a business, so I had some idea of what this was all about. But really, I wasn't very prepared for this. Secondly, I also wanted to hone my skills as a writer, so I said I want to go to graduate school for writing. Don't know if I can get into a graduate school for writing. I didn't go into writing as an undergrad, so who knows what this is all going to turn into. But I'm going to leap and see what happens. And like I said, I gave myself 1 year from the time that I got back to the US to figure it out. So I had this all written in journals and sorted out, and I was ready to execute my plan. Now, I talk a lot about the power of the heart, and people have been talking about this forever. The ancients, the poets, the mystics, they often refer to the heart as the seat of the soul, or where the spirit resides. Now, also you can look at it, if you're familiar with the chakra system, the heart is the very center. There's 3 lower chakras, then there's the heart, and then the 3 upper chakras. So it's often referred to as a bridge or a meeting point of body and spirit, or the upper and lower chakras. How does this impact all of us, though? Why are you here? There are 3 critical areas that this might have something to do with each of you. First and foremost, health. As you know, our country is in a health crisis right now. Often it's because of the foods that we're eating and the exercise that we're not getting. One of the biggest contributors to those health issues is stress. And if you can learn how to access the power of your heart, you can learn how to control your stress levels, which greatly impacts your health. Secondarily is your relationships. And while that does include the romantic relationships, I'm not just talking about Valentine's Day hearts and gushy stuff here. I'm talking about this primal force that's called love that can impact your work relationships, your family relationships, your friends, your colleagues, anyone. And as if those 2 weren't important enough, the third, and more recently developed or discovered, is that the heart greatly impacts your ability to be creative and intuitive. So think about you and your businesses, in making decisions. If you could do that with a wiser perspective, wouldn't that be helpful to you? So let's talk a little bit about the science of the heart. There's this brilliant stuff going on right now. It's called neurocardiology. It's combining the study of the brain with the study of the heart and saying, how are these things working together? As many of you might have learned in school, like I did, the brain just controls everything through the nervous system, and everything else just goes according to that. Well, what they're finding nowadays is that that's not even true. The heart communicates to the brain as the brain communicates to the heart, and there are actually neurons, which used to be known as brain cells, in the heart. So it's not simply something that this up here is just controlling everything, but actually our hearts are in just vast control of everything that we have going on. There's a term in science called coherence. And if you think about that in terms of a sentence, if the sentence that you're listening to makes sense, it is a coherent sentence. The same idea is with the body. When the body is in harmony, it's coherent. So that's when all systems are communicating, everything's going as planned, stress levels are low, blood pressure is low, and all is well. Obviously, the opposite is incoherent, when something's not making sense. What this looks like, they can actually track this on a heart monitor. When you're in the state of coherence, it's this beautiful, smooth line, similar to a sine wave, if you're familiar with what that is, goes up and down, smooth crests and valleys. When it's incoherent, it's all over the place, just a jagged line. That's when your heart's racing or your blood pressure's high, so many different things going on. Another way to talk about that is what's called entrainment. And the idea of entrainment came from physics. It started with a man who created the pendulum clocks. Now, as many of you know, pendulum clocks are the things with the little guys that spin like this, and he had a whole room full of these pendulum clocks. And what he found was that he would start each pendulum going, all different timings, different variations, and then this really crazy thing happened when he went to check out his room the next day. He wakes up in the morning, goes into his living room, and he sees that every single pendulum in the room is going at exactly the same rate. Now that's what your heart does. Your heart has the power to bring everything in the body into entrainment. It's so powerful that actually they can use these fancy machines nowadays to detect the electromagnetism of the heart, and they can read that outside of the body up to 10 feet away. It's fascinating. The brain doesn't even come close in that regard. So the heart is super powerful. Now, what does this have to do with real life? A man sat down across the table from me, and he stated his objective very clearly. He said, "I need you to help me leave my wife." Okay. Why do you want to leave your wife? What's going on? Let me ask you a bunch more questions about that. Well, this guy had a family business that had been passed down to him through generations that was very successful. He was doing great. But he was solely responsible for this business nowadays and didn't feel like he was able to offer the time and effort and energy and focus to keep this business afloat and doing as successful as it was, and maintain a really solid, awesome relationship with his wife. So in his mind, logically, he said, well, I got to get rid of one of them. And obviously, since this is my family heritage, I can't ditch the business, so she's got to go. I was like, hold on, okay, let's try and figure this out. One of the techniques that I taught to him, which I would love to share with you right now, is what I call heart breath. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you a tiny little taste of what it's like to feel coherence. So, as I'm speaking, if you would just close your eyes and begin to notice the way that you're breathing, whether it's through your nose or through your mouth, doesn't matter. Just take a deep breath. Notice your exhale. And see if you can actually visualize your breath. Sometimes it helps to think of it as a color or a light. And what I'd like you to do now is see if you can drop your breath. Instead of bringing it in through your nose or through your mouth, see if you can visualize it coming in directly through your chest to your heart. And see what that feels like, if it's going in and out of your chest, as if your heart were actually your lungs. Deep breaths in and out. And what you may notice, because this is very common in our society, we are very head-driven. So oftentimes when we're asked to think about something or focus on something, we're actually looking at it from our heads, which makes sense because that's where our eyes are, so we're usually visualizing literally. But when we're asked to do it figuratively in our imagination, we still look from the perspective of the head. So now try this. See if you can, on your next in-breath, drop your awareness from the space of your eyes or from your head down into your heart. And breathe directly into that awareness, and then exhale from that awareness out. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And like I said, what you just experienced was a tiny little taste of coherence. What that can do in the body is lower the blood pressure, open up new neural pathways for creativity and intuition, and so influence the brain that it can change your consciousness. When your consciousness changes, your world changes. The way to get into coherence is to focus on things like love, compassion, gratitude, appreciation. Alex's world, my client who I told you about, his world changed because with that technique and many others that I taught him, he was able to realize that, oh, I actually don't have to just choose one or the other. I don't have to pick my work or my wife. I can have both, and I can do both really, really well and have a rockin' relationship and a totally successful business. And I'm happy to report, 4 years later, today, he is happily married to the same woman, which is fantastic. My world was changed. In Africa, I had this plan. I'm going to go out, make my way in 1 year from returning back to the US. 2 days before I leave from Nairobi, there's all this conversation and stuff going on online. Mindie, what's going on? Your company's going to make this big announcement. What's happening? Like, I don't know. I'm in Africa. I'm totally not plugged into any of this stuff. Well, you need to find out. It's really important. Like, okay, so I'm emailing some people. It's all way later for them because of the time change, so nobody's telling me anything what's going on. But here's what I found out. That day, 2 days before I was supposed to leave, the company made a decision to close our site where I worked. So I was like, this is awesome, because I was planning to leave anyway. How exciting. But it gets better. They said, not only are we closing, but we're going to give you guys about a year to wrap up your projects and decommission the site and transfer everything to somewhere else. And then at the end of that year, you'll have the opportunity. You can either relocate to one of the other sites, or we'll give you a severance and send you on your way. And I said, awesome. My world was changed by by following the direction of my heart. Think about, for you, what would change in your world if you learned to access the power and intelligence of your hearts. Thank you.